My name is Claire Matthews. I'm 35 years old, and today I buried my husband, Daniel, overseas. After more than 30 sleepless hours of travel back home, I sent one simple text to our family group chat. Flight lands at 5 p.m. Can someone pick me up? My brother, Ethan, replied, "We're busy. Try Uber." My mother added, "Why didn't you plan better?" With shaking hands, I typed back, "No worries." But inside, I was breaking. What I didn't know then was that within just a few hours, my family, the same people I'd counted on my whole life, would be watching my tragedy play out on the evening news for everyone to see. Before I take you through what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and if you've ever felt abandoned by the people you thought would be there for you, hit like and subscribe, because this is a story about what happens when the people you count on let you fall. Before grief tore my world apart, I had what most people would call a picture-perfect life. Daniel and I met sophomore year of college. He accidentally spilled coffee all over my economics textbook, insisted on replacing it, and somehow turned that small disaster into a dinner date. From that moment, life with him felt effortless. We got married right after graduation, building a home and a future together in Seattle. I was a marketing director, and Daniel thrived as a software engineer. Our two-story house had a little backyard garden that I poured my heart into every spring. Daniel would tease me, saying my tomatoes could win ribbons at the state fair if I ever entered them. 10 years of marriage passed like a beautiful dream. Weekend getaways, Thursday night game nights with friends, and careful saving for the future we were planning. We'd just started talking about having a baby. We'd even converted the spare bedroom into a home office that could easily become a nursery when the time came. Then, last fall, Daniel was offered a 6-month contract with an international tech firm in Singapore. It was the kind of opportunity that could change everything for us, a career leap for him, and a chance to experience living abroad together. I arranged to work remotely for part of it so I could join him for 3 months. We were both so excited. The night before he left, we had a quiet dinner at home. I can still picture the candlelight flickering across his face, the soft music playing, and the way he held my hands when he said, "6 months will fly by, and then we'll start the next chapter." For the first 2 months apart, we video called every day. I flew out to spend 3 weeks with him over the holidays. It felt like a second honeymoon. Singapore was vibrant, full of life, and every weekend we explored somewhere new. We even started talking seriously about trying for a baby once his contract ended. But then came the phone call that changed everything. I was back in Seattle when it happened. It was morning here, and Daniel had joined our video call with one hand rubbing his temples. "Just a bad headache," he said. "Probably stress, big project deadline this week." I told him to take it easy. He smiled, said he'd be fine, and we ended the call. 8 hours later, my phone rang again, but it wasn't Daniel. It was one of his coworkers calling from his phone. "Claire, Daniel collapsed during a meeting. They've taken him to the hospital." I booked the first flight out, but by the time I arrived in Singapore, 26 hours later, he was in a coma. The doctor said it was a brain aneurysm. They had done emergency surgery, but the damage was catastrophic. For 5 days, I sat by his hospital bed, holding his hand, telling him stories, praying for a miracle that never came. He never woke up. Daniel was just 37 years old. Then came the next challenge, navigating the medical and legal process in a foreign country completely alone. Every form was in unfamiliar terms. Every conversation required a translation app or a hurried interpreter. I called my family every day, desperate for comfort. "We're praying for you," they'd say, before rushing off the phone. My mother asked if I'd bought travel insurance. My brother, Ethan, suggested I hire a local service to handle things so I could come home sooner. But I couldn't leave Daniel, not in a place where the only people who knew him were coworkers. The paperwork for his death certificate alone took 3 full days and countless office visits. Bringing his body home was too expensive, so I arranged for him to be buried in Singapore. The funeral was small, A few of his colleagues, a couple of expats he'd befriended, and me. No family, no lifelong friends. My parents said the flights were too expensive on such short notice. Ethan had critical work obligations. And so I stood alone as they lowered my husband into the ground, a world away from everyone we loved. Looking back now, I shouldn't have been surprised by my family's reaction. They had always been like this. Moments when they could have shown up for me, but didn't. When I graduated high school as valedictorian, my parents attended the ceremony, but left immediately afterward to get Ethan to his baseball game. At my college graduation, they arrived late and left early. Even on my wedding day, my mother spent more time fussing over Ethan, who had brought the wrong girlfriend, than celebrating my marriage. I spent my whole life making excuses for them, convincing myself that family just had different ways of showing love. But standing at Daniel's grave, alone in a foreign country, I finally saw the truth. Some people simply don't have the capacity to put others first, even in your moments of deepest need. After the funeral, the nightmare continued. Singapore's bureaucracy required multiple certified copies of Daniel's death certificate, each authenticated at different government offices scattered across the city. For 3 days, I stood in endless lines under the tropical heat, grief choking every word I tried to speak. Each night, I returned to the small apartment we had rented, surrounded by his clothes that still smelled faintly of him. On my final morning, I went to his grave one last time. The cemetery was peaceful, the air damp with morning dew. I laid fresh flowers by his headstone and sat on the grass, telling him what I was bringing home, his favorite books, the watch I gave him on our 5th anniversary, the seashells we'd collected together. "I'll keep you alive in my heart every day for the rest of my life," I whispered. Then I began the long journey home and had no idea just how much worse things were about to get. Getting back to Seattle was its own kind of punishment. First, a 6-hour delay in Singapore because of mechanical issues. Then, a missed connection in Tokyo that forced me to spend the night in an airport hotel. By the time I boarded my final flight, I had been traveling for more than 30 hours. I hadn't eaten much, and I was running on nothing but grief and willpower. Somewhere over the Pacific, my mind wandered back to old memories I'd buried under years of excuses. When I was 8, I broke my arm falling from the treehouse in our backyard. My parents drove me to the ER, then left me there with a neighbor so they could take Ethan to his championship soccer game. When I earned a scholarship to my dream college, my father's first question wasn't about congratulations, it was whether it would cost them anything. Ethan's summer sports camp, he reminded me, wasn't cheap. I worked 2 jobs to afford school, while Ethan attended an out-of-state university fully funded by our parents. Even my wedding day had cracks I ignored. My father complained about the cost of the modest venue, and Ethan showed up an hour late, claiming traffic. Daniel had seen all of this, of course, but he gently reminded me, "We can't change them, Claire, but we can choose how much power we give them over our happiness." Still, some part of me believed that this, Daniel's death, would be the moment they finally showed up. 3 days before my final flight, I sent our family group chat my arrival details. They replied with thumbs-up emojis. Ethan asked if I'd be bringing souvenirs. When we touched down in Seattle, I sent one last message. "Just landed." Ethan's reply came quickly. "We're busy. Try Uber." My mother's, "Why didn't you plan better?" The words hit me like a physical blow. Sitting there in that cramped airplane seat, I made a silent promise to myself and to Daniel. This would be the last time I expected water from an empty well. Seattle-Tacoma International was buzzing that afternoon, rolling suitcases, the echo of overhead announcements, the impatient shuffle of travelers trying to get home. I moved through customs on autopilot. My body was there, but my mind, it was still with Daniel. At baggage claim, I watched the carousel turn, each passing suitcase blurring into the next until I spotted mine. One large black case for my clothes and 2 others stuffed with the things I couldn't bear to leave behind. Daniel's favorite sweater, the leather journal I gave him last Christmas, photo albums, the coffee mug he used every morning. Each bag was a piece of the life we'd built together. Now they were all I had left of him. My phone buzzed. I opened our family group chat, praying someone had changed their mind. Ethan: "Seriously, Claire, we can't rearrange our schedules last minute. This is why planning exists." Mom: "Your father and I have dinner with the Hendersons tonight. We RSVP'd weeks ago." Dad: "Forecast says rain later. Drive carefully when you get home." Not a single word about whether I was okay. Not a single question about if I'd made it safely. I typed, "No worries, I understand." And though I wrote the words, I didn't understand. How could dinner plans and social obligations matter more than meeting your daughter, your sister, after she'd buried her husband alone? I loaded the suitcases onto a cart. The weight was unbearable, both physically and emotionally. Halfway to the exit, one of the cart's wheels jammed, sending the top suitcase crashing to the floor. It burst open, Daniel's clothes scattering across the polished airport tile. I dropped to my knees, trying to gather them as tears blurred my vision. A blue sweater, his running shoes, the tie he wore for our anniversary dinner, each one a fresh wound. "Let me help you, ma'am." I looked up. An airport employee knelt beside me, gently folding Daniel's shirt. Her name tag read Gloria. She had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. That simple question cracked something inside me. "My husband died," I whispered. "I just buried him in Singapore." Gloria helped me repack without another word. She walked with me to the rideshare pickup, stayed until my car arrived, and squeezed my hand before I left. It was more compassion than my own family had offered. The rideshare cost $78 thanks to rush hour pricing. The driver, an older man named Paul, made small talk as we inched through traffic. When he asked about my trip, I kept my answers vague, afraid that if I told the truth, I'd fall apart completely. By the time we turned into my driveway, the house looked exactly as I'd left it, yet completely different. Daniel would never again walk through that door, never pull into this driveway, never grumble about the maple tree dropping seeds into the gutters. Paul helped me carry the suitcases to the porch. "Are you sure you're okay, miss?" he asked. I nodded. "I'm fine." It was a lie. Inside, the air was stale and cold. I had asked my mother to adjust the thermostat the day before I came home. Clearly, she hadn't. Mail overflowed from the basket by the door. The fridge was bare, except for expired condiments and something moldy in the back. Ethan had promised to stock the basics. He hadn't. Too tired to argue with reality, I dragged myself upstairs. I couldn't bear to sleep in our bed, not tonight. Instead, I curled into the armchair by the window, still wearing my coat against the chill. Surrounded by photographs of happier times, I finally broke down completely. At some point, I must have fallen asleep. When I woke, the house was silent in a way it had never been when Daniel was alive. No footsteps in the hall, no hum from the coffee maker, no sound of him singing off-key in the shower. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. The closet door cracked open. Inside, his clothes were exactly as he'd left them 6 months ago. Shoes neatly lined, flannel shirt hanging from the hook. I pulled the shirt into my arms, hoping for the faintest trace of his scent, but there was nothing left, just clean cotton and the stale smell of a space shut too long. That's when I heard it, a strange gurgling from downstairs. The gurgling grew louder as I made my way to the kitchen. When I flipped on the light, I froze. Water was pouring from a crack in the ceiling, cascading down the walls, pooling across the tile floor. The temperature in the house had dropped so low I could see my breath. I waded through 3 inches of icy water to reach the utility closet. The metal wheel of the main shutoff valve burned my fingers with cold, but I kept turning until the flow stopped. It was too late. The hardwood floors in the dining room were already warping. The drywall in the kitchen sagged like wet cardboard. Water dripped from light fixtures, a dangerous mix of electricity and disaster. The pipe must have frozen and burst during the cold snap I'd missed while overseas. If someone had kept the heat running, this never would have happened. I called an emergency plumber. The dispatcher was apologetic but firm. "We're booked solid, burst pipes all over the city. Earliest we can get there is Tuesday." It was Friday. The storm outside was worsening. The news alerts on my phone had been warning about it for days, something my family must have known when they told me to drive carefully. I called Ethan. He answered on the fourth ring. "Hey, can't really talk. Lisa and I are hosting the Wilsons tonight. Big clients." "The house is flooded," I said flatly. "A pipe burst. There's no heat, water's in the electrical fixtures, and the plumber can't come until Tuesday. Can I stay with you until this is fixed?" A pause. Tonight's really bad timing. Guest room's full of Lisa's craft stuff. Have you called Mom and Dad?" I hung up and tried them next. My mother's voice was already full of excuses. "Oh, honey, the bridge club is meeting here tomorrow. We've been prepping all day. Your father's back is acting up. We just can't take guests right now. Maybe a hotel?" By then, I hadn't eaten in over 24 hours. My body was running on fumes, grief, exhaustion, and now cold, seeping into my bones. The lights flickered. The storm howled outside, and the house felt like it was closing in. In a last, desperate attempt to fix something, anything, I decided to check the electrical panel in the basement. If I could at least get partial heat running, maybe I could make it through the night. The stairs were slick with water, so I clung to the railing as I descended into the dark, musty space. The water was ankle-deep, cold enough to sting. Using my phone's flashlight, I reached the far wall where the panel sat. I took one step forward, and my foot slipped on the slick concrete. Instinctively, my hand shot out to brace against the metal box. A sharp jolt of electricity tore through my arm. My body lurched backward, my head hitting something hard. For a moment, nothing but black. When I came to, I was sprawled on the basement floor, shivering violently. My right arm was tingling with pins and needles. Warmth trickled down the side of my face. When I touched it, my fingers came away red. Somehow, I pushed myself upright. The basement spun around me as I staggered toward the stairs. Halfway up, I had to sit, dizzy, my vision tunneling. By the time I reached the living room, my body was nearly numb. The house was even colder now. I couldn't feel my fingers or toes. That's when a new sound cut through the silence, a high-pitched beeping, the carbon monoxide detector. The heating system must have been damaged by the flooding, pushing toxic gas into the air. My phone sat on the coffee table, just inches away, but my arm wouldn't move. My body refused to respond. Darkness began to creep in at the edges of my vision, and in that strange, heavy quiet, a single thought took root. If this is it, at least I'll be with Daniel again. The last thing I remember was pounding on the front door, a voice calling my name, and then nothing. When I woke, I was staring up at a ceiling I didn't recognize, bright lights, the distant echo of beeping monitors. Later, I learned what had happened. Diane Foster, my neighbor from across the street, had noticed water running down my porch steps and pooling on the sidewalk. She tried calling me. When I didn't answer, she came over. She knocked, called my name. Then she heard the carbon monoxide alarm screaming from inside. She didn't hesitate. She called 911. Firefighters forced the door and found me unconscious on the living room sofa, the house dangerously cold and partially flooded, with carbon monoxide levels far above the safe limit. The paramedics told me later, another hour, maybe 2, and I wouldn't have made it. I had moderate hypothermia, carbon monoxide poisoning, a concussion, and burns from the electrical shock. At the hospital, they wrapped me in warming blankets, pumped oxygen into my lungs, stitched the gash on my temple, and ran test after test to make sure my heart and brain were still okay. One nurse, Sarah, sat beside me while I drifted in and out. She noticed my passport stamped from Singapore, the wedding ring still on my hand, and asked gently about my husband. I told her everything: Daniel's death, the overseas funeral, the family who couldn't even pick me up from the airport. What neither of us knew then was that my story was about to spread far beyond that hospital room, because in the next few hours, it would hit the evening news. It started with a reporter named Michael Chen. He was at the hospital covering storm-related emergencies when he overheard one of the paramedics talking about my case in the break room. The details sounded almost unreal. A woman returning from her husband's funeral overseas, nearly dying in her own home just hours after arriving, with no family there to help. Michael interviewed Diane, my neighbor. "I saw her get out of a rideshare yesterday," she told the camera. "She looked exhausted. I meant to check on her, but with the storm coming, I got caught up prepping my house. I had no idea she was going through all that alone." He also spoke with one of the paramedics who had helped save me. The man shook his head as he recounted what he saw. Her phone was still open to the family group chat when we found her. She'd asked for a ride from the airport, and they told her to get an Uber. Then she comes home to this: no heat, no help. It's heartbreaking. By that night, the story aired on the local news under the headline, "Local Woman Returns from Husband's Funeral to Near Tragedy at Home." The piece detailed how I'd buried Daniel in Singapore, traveled 30 hours back to Seattle, been denied even the smallest help from family, and then nearly died from a preventable household disaster. It didn't take long for screenshots of the text exchange shared by someone at the hospital to spread online. Within hours, the hashtag no worries began trending locally, as strangers posted their own stories of being abandoned in moments of need. Offers started pouring in. A plumbing company volunteered to fix the damage for free. A hotel offered a room until the repairs were done. Neighbors I barely knew asked if I needed meals or errands run. The kindness of strangers was overwhelming. And my family? They saw the news too, and they came to the hospital the very next morning. Ethan was the first to walk into my hospital room. His face was pale, his voice shaky. "We just saw the news. They're making it sound like we abandoned you." My mother followed close behind, already on the defensive. "This is a complete misrepresentation," she told the nurse before even looking at me. "We had no idea the house was in that condition. Claire knows we would have helped if we'd understood the situation." My father lingered in the doorway, silent. He didn't move toward me until the nurse stepped out. Then he came closer and quietly asked, "Are you going to be okay?" It was the first genuine question any of them had asked since Daniel died. Within minutes, my phone started buzzing, calls from extended family and family friends who had seen the broadcast. My aunt demanded to know why no one had gone to the airport. One of my father's coworkers texted to say he was shocked by what he'd seen. The carefully polished image my family had always kept was cracking. Out in the hallway, I could hear them arguing in low voices about how to handle the situation. Ethan was worried about his professional reputation. My mother was fretting about her bridge club. My father suggested they bring me to their house once I was discharged, just so people could see they were taking care of me. Not once did I hear words like, "I'm sorry," or "How can we help?" It was all about appearances. Then the hospital social worker came in with news. The community had arranged more help for me: a free hotel stay during repairs, meal deliveries, neighbors volunteering to check in, and for the first time, someone said it out loud: "You don't have to go home with your family if you don't want to." The social worker's words hung in the air like a lifeline. You don't have to go home with your family if you don't want to. My mother stiffened. Of course she's coming home with her family. That's where she belongs. But the nurse beside me, Jessica, didn't back down. She looked me straight in the eye. "The choice is yours, Claire." Something inside me shifted. For the first time in weeks, I felt steady. "I'd like to hear the alternatives," I said. The room went silent. Ethan stopped scrolling on his phone. My mother's mouth opened, then closed without a sound. My father turned from the window, frowning. "You can't be serious," my mother finally said, "after everything we've done." "What exactly have you done?" The words came out calm but sharp. "When Daniel was dying, you were too busy to come. When I buried him alone, flights were too expensive. When I needed a ride from the airport, you told me to get an Uber. When the pipe burst, you chose bridge club and business dinners. So tell me, what is it you've done that gives you the right to decide what's best for me now?" Ethan shot back. "That's not fair. We didn't know how bad things were." "You didn't ask," I replied. "Not once did you ask how I was really doing. Not once did you offer help without a condition attached." My mother's face flushed. "Families can't drop everything for every little crisis." I held her gaze. Needing a ride from the airport after burying my husband isn't a little crisis. Making sure my house wasn't freezing in winter wasn't an unrealistic expectation. My father finally spoke. "We know you're upset. Grief makes people say things they don't mean." I took a deep breath. "I'm thinking more clearly now than I have in years, and I'm done pretending you can give me what I need, or that you would if you could." "So what are you saying?" my mother demanded. "You'd rather stay with strangers than with your own family?" "I'm saying I choose to heal," I answered. "I choose to be surrounded by genuine care, not obligation disguised as love." The social worker, Miss Patel, stepped forward with a folder. Inside were the details. 2 weeks at the Riverview Hotel while my house was repaired. Prepared meal deliveries, transportation to medical appointments, a grief support group that met twice a week, neighbors volunteering to check in on me. The contrast was sharp, strangers offering warmth without strings attached, while my own family stood there, frozen by pride. "This is ridiculous," Ethan said. "You're choosing random people over your own blood." I looked at him, really looked at him, maybe for the first time in my life. "I'm choosing kindness over convenience. I'm choosing help that comes without conditions." My mother grabbed her purse. "When you come to your senses, we'll be waiting. But don't expect us to drop everything again when you decide you need us." I almost laughed. That's exactly my point. I never could expect that. And now I no longer will. They filed out without another word. My father lingered in the doorway for a second, as if he might say something real. But all he did was nod once before following them down the hall. Jessica stayed behind. She adjusted my pillows and said softly, "That took courage, Claire. Setting boundaries when you're vulnerable is one of the hardest things you can do." "It doesn't feel like courage," I admitted. "It feels like giving up." "You're not giving up," she said. "You're giving yourself permission to heal without carrying their baggage too." That afternoon, the community services team came to finalize my discharge plan. The hotel manager assured me my suite was ready, warm, quiet, and stocked with the basics. The restoration crew showed me photos of my home, already in the early stages of repair. The meal delivery coordinator went over dietary preferences and drop-off times. Every interaction carried something my family had never offered, genuine care, freely given. By early evening, I was settled into a spacious room at the Riverview Hotel, the window overlooking the river that ran through the city. The room was warm, the bed soft, and the small fridge held simple, nourishing foods. On the desk sat a potted plant with a handwritten card signed by the hospital staff who had cared for me. For the first time since Daniel died, the silence around me didn't feel like abandonment. It felt safe. I stood by the window as the sun set over the water, the sky painted in soft golds and blues. I whispered to Daniel, "I think you'd be proud of me today. I finally did what you always told me I should." In my heart, I could almost hear him say, "I've always been proud of you. You just needed to be proud of yourself." It wasn't happiness, not yet, but maybe, just maybe, it was the first fragile seed of peace. The next 3 months passed in a slow, steady rhythm of healing. Physically, I improved faster than I expected. The concussion symptoms faded after a few weeks of rest. The burn on my hand left only a faint mark. The gash above my eyebrow healed into a thin silver line hidden beneath my hair. Emotionally, that took longer. The grief support group at the community center became my anchor. Twice a week, I sat in a circle of people who understood the weight of loss without me having to explain it. Our facilitator, Eleanor, had a gift for asking the kind of questions that made you see your life differently. Grief strips away pretense, she'd say. It forces you to confront the truth, both the beautiful and the painful. My home transformed alongside me. The restoration team didn't just repair the damage, they improved everything. A smart thermostat I could monitor remotely, a new energy-efficient water heater, reinforced plumbing so another freeze couldn't take me down. Neighbors I barely knew before became part of my life. Diane, the one who saved me, brought homemade soup every Sunday. Robert and Thomas from down the street helped replant my garden beds in the spring. Maria, a retired teacher at the end of the block, would stop by on hard days and just sit with me. No words, just presence. My family stayed at a polite distance. Occasional texts, a generic thinking of you card signed by all three of them. Ethan called once, more to explain what his clients thought of the news story than to ask how I was doing. And I kept the boundary I'd set in that hospital room. Not as punishment, but as protection. 6 months after Daniel's death, I knew I needed to do something that turned all that pain into purpose. That's when I created the Daniel Matthews Memorial Scholarship for International Education at our alma mater. I used the life insurance funds that had finally come through, and I built the scholarship to cover not just tuition, but something most people never think about: emergency support. If a student studying abroad faced a crisis, this fund would cover travel for family, emergency expenses, even the unexpected costs that can derail a life overnight. Because I knew exactly what it felt like to face tragedy halfway across the world with no safety net. Working on the scholarship gave me something to focus on besides grief. Every provision I wrote into it came from a lesson I'd learned the hard way. Every safeguard was something I wished I'd had. Daniel had always believed in the power of education. Helping students experience the world while knowing they wouldn't be left stranded felt like the perfect way to honor him. On what would have been our 11th anniversary, I hosted a small gathering at my rebuilt home to announce the scholarship's first recipient. Friends who had stood by me through everything came, along with new friends I'd made during my recovery. My family received invitations. They sent regrets, prior commitments. I stood in my living room holding the certificate for Angela, a bright-eyed junior planning to study in Japan, and I felt Daniel's presence. Not in some mystical way, but in the resilience I carried, in the love that hadn't died with him. This scholarship exists because of a great love and a great loss, I told them, but also because I learned something important. Family can be found in the most surprising places, not always by blood, but by who shows up when showing up matters most. A week after the scholarship event, I found an envelope in my mailbox with handwriting I didn't recognize at first. It was from my father. In all my life, I'd never received a handwritten letter from him. Inside, the words were simple, but heavier than I expected. "I've been thinking about what happened after you came back from Singapore," he wrote. "Your mother and Ethan may never admit it, but I see it clearly. We failed you, not just with airport rides and house checks, but in the deeper responsibility to give comfort in your darkest hours. I have no excuse, only a late and insufficient acknowledgement. The man you married would be proud of the woman you've become. Perhaps, someday, if you're willing, we can find a way forward, not as we were, but as we could be." I didn't respond right away. The letter wasn't something I wanted to react to in the heat of emotion. It needed time. In my next therapy session, I brought it up. My therapist asked me one question that stuck. Not what you think you should want, but what would actually serve your well-being in a relationship with your father. It took me days to find the answer. When I did, I wrote back with clear boundaries. I told him I'd be open to occasional lunches, just the two of us, but I wouldn't return to family gatherings or holiday events for now. Any relationship moving forward would have to be based on mutual respect, not performance. To my surprise, he agreed without argument. Our first lunch was awkward but civil, the second slightly less so. By the third, we'd found a slow, careful rhythm, not a father-daughter bond people would envy, but an honest connection we'd never had before. My mother and Ethan kept their distance, sending only holiday cards or generic gifts. I accepted it as their choice and chose to spend my energy where it was valued. A year after Daniel's death, I stood in the departure lounge of the Seattle airport, the same place I'd landed broken and abandoned 12 months earlier. This time, I was boarding a flight back to Singapore to visit his grave on the anniversary. All around me, families reunited with hugs and laughter, the kind of joyful chaos I'd once longed for from my own family. Now, I felt something different. Not longing, not anger, just acceptance. I'd learned something over the past year. Family can be chosen. Support can come from the most unexpected places. Boundaries aren't walls, they're filters that let the good in while keeping the harm out. And most importantly, my worth was never defined by whether certain people could see it. As I boarded the plane, I thought about how different this trip felt compared to the one a year ago. Then, I had been a shell, hollowed out by grief, desperate for support that never came. Now, I carried a community with me, people who had shown up when it mattered most, people who still showed up day after day in ways big and small. The greatest lesson from that terrible homecoming wasn't about my family's failures. It was about the power of kindness from unexpected places, the healing that happens when you are truly seen in your darkest moments, the family you create when the one you were born into can't or won't meet your needs. If you've ever been left standing alone when you needed someone most, I want you to hear this. You are not alone. Your worth isn't measured by the people who couldn't show up for you. Sometimes, the ones you expect to be there simply can't give you what you need, not because you're unworthy, but because of their own limits. The challenge is to stay open to unexpected kindness, even when your history makes you wary. Because sometimes, the people who step in out of nowhere become the ones who change everything. So I'll ask you, what unexpected sources of support have you found in your life? Have strangers ever given you the care you thought would come from family? Share your story in the comments. If mine resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it. You never know who might need to hear that their boundaries are valid and their healing is possible. And remember, your story matters, your boundaries matter, and even in the moments you feel most abandoned, the right people will still find their way to you. Thank you for being part of this journey with me.